Years after calling me infertile, I crashed his event with my twins. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. Daniel, you don't get to look shocked. You call me barren. Meet my twins. That was the first thing I said when I stepped through the ballroom doors with a diaper bag on one shoulder and one child holding each of my hands. The string quartet didn't stop immediately. That would have been too neat. They kept sawing through some soft, expensive song while conversations thinned around me, one table at a time, until the only sound I really heard was my own pulse. My daughter Lucy gripped my fingers and pressed against my leg. My son Jonah stared at the chandelier like he was in a museum instead of the center of the most reckless decision I'd made in years. I almost turned around right there. Not because I was ashamed of them. Never that. Because I knew exactly what walking into Daniel's engagement party meant. It meant tearing open a lie he had used to bury me. For years earlier, he had convinced half our circle that I was the reason our life collapsed. He said it gently at first, like a man carrying tragic news. Claire can't have children. He needs a family. He needs to move on. By the time the story finished traveling, I wasn't a person anymore. I was a disappointment in a nice dress. A warning. A quiet failure. Now I was 34, living in a different suburb with a husband who never treated my body like a broken promise, and I had 2 3-year-olds who smelled like sunscreen and applesauce. I should have been home reading bedtime stories. Instead, I was standing in a room full of polished strangers and familiar traders, staring at the man who once watched me cry in a fertility clinic parking lot and still chose cruelty over truth. Daniel's fiancée had gone pale. Vanessa, who stood near the champagne tower, looked like she'd forgotten how to blink. Daniel himself had frozen with one hand still wrapped around a microphone, his practiced smile hanging off his face like bad theater. Then he set down the glass in his other hand and said my name like a warning. That was when I realized he still thought silence belonged to him. Before Daniel became a man in a fitted tuxedo with a curated guest list, he was just the guy who brought me soup when I had the flu and left stupid sticky notes on the bathroom mirror. We met when I was 26 and exhausted from working doubles at a pediatric dental office. He was funny, precise, impossible not to notice. He talked like every sentence deserved a clean finish. On our third date, he told me he wanted 3 kids and a house with a swing set. "I'm serious," he said, grinning over tacos from a truck outside my apartment. "I want chaos. Crayon on the walls. Somebody yelling from upstairs." I laughed and said, "That is the least romantic version of family I've ever heard." "It's the honest version," he said. "You still in?" Back then I was. Completely. The first 2 years were easy in that deceptive way people envy from the outside. We traveled, combined bookshelves, argued about paint colors, adopted routines that made us feel permanent. Daniel liked control, but I mistook that for reliability. He planned vacations down to the parking apps. He corrected waiters when they got his orders slightly wrong. He rehearsed difficult conversations before having them. If something didn't fit the picture in his head, he tightened. When we started trying for a baby, that tightness turned into obsession. At first it was sweet. He downloaded an app. He bought vitamins. He kissed my stomach like hope was a ritual. Then the months kept passing. One line. Another one line. Another cycle spent pretending I wasn't calculating due dates in grocery store aisles. Daniel changed in inches, not explosions. He started asking whether I'd remembered every appointment, whether I'd been too stressed, whether my long work hours were messing with my hormones. Once, while I was setting ovulation strips beside the sink, he sighed and said, "We're making this harder than it should be." I looked up. "We?" He didn't answer right away. He just stared at the little plastic tests like they had personally offended him. That was the first time I felt a crack run underneath us. We lasted 9 more months after that, and almost all of them smelled like antiseptic and disappointment. There were blood draws before sunrise, cold waiting rooms, ultrasound screens I pretended to understand, pamphlets about timing and optimism. I cried in private at first. Daniel preferred not to see it. He called tears spiraling, like grief was a branding problem. The day he called me infertile was a Thursday in April, the kind of bright spring afternoon that made cruelty feel even sharper. We had just come back from the clinic. I remember my shoes by the door, my handbag sliding off the console, his silence following me into the kitchen. I was opening the fridge when he said, too casually, Dr. Patel was being diplomatic because that's her job. I turned around. What does that mean? He leaned against the counter, arms folded. It means somebody is the reason this isn't happening. Somebody, I repeated. He gave me this exhausted look, like I was making him say it. Claire, come on. You heard her. Low probability, more testing, maybe intervention. She was trying not to label it, but it's obvious. I felt heat crawl up my neck. She said we both needed further testing. Right? He said, with a tiny laugh. Because doctors say we when they don't want to crush a woman. For a second, I actually forgot how to breathe. You don't know that. He pushed off the counter and walked closer. His voice dropped, which somehow made it worse. I'm 33. I want children before I'm too old to enjoy them. I can't build my whole life around maybe. My whole life. I said, this is my body too. And that's exactly the issue, Claire. I remember the room going painfully still. The hum of the refrigerator. A car passing outside. My own face reflected in the microwave door, stunned and small. I wanted him to take it back so badly that I started negotiating with reality in real time. You're angry, I said. You don't mean this. He didn't blink. I think you're infertile, and I think we both know it. Then he left me with the clinic wristband still on my arm. If Daniel had kept his accusation inside our apartment, maybe the damage would have stayed survivable. Instead, he sanded off the ugliest parts of what he'd done and turned it into a sympathetic story. He never said, I blamed Claire because I couldn't face uncertainty. He said, we wanted different futures. He said, it's heartbreaking. He said, some things are too painful to discuss in detail. Then he let everyone fill in the blanks exactly the way he wanted. The first hint came from Vanessa. At the time, she was still more his friend than mine, but we'd spent enough holidays together that I trusted her face. She called 2 days after Daniel moved into a hotel. Hey, she said carefully, I just wanted to check on you. I was sitting on our bedroom floor, surrounded by half-packed boxes I hadn't touched in an hour. I'm alive. She hesitated. Daniel told people the fertility situation was worse than you expected. The box cutter slipped from my hand. What people? A pause. His mother. A couple friends. Me. I started laughing, and it sounded wrong even to me. Amazing. So he gets to diagnose me and announce it? I'm not saying that's fair. But you believed him. She went quiet, which was answer enough. After that, the humiliation came in smaller, sharper pieces. One friend stopped inviting me to baby showers, like fertility failure might be contagious. Daniel's mother mailed me a saint card with a note that read, sometimes God closes one door to guide us elsewhere. A woman at a mutual friend's barbecue squeezed my arm and whispered, there are other ways to have a full life. Before I'd even sat down, I started hearing my own name in lowered voices. Poor Claire. Such a shame. Daniel really wanted a family. The worst part was how quickly I began to cooperate with my own erasure. I stopped correcting people. I stopped going places where children might be. I stopped looking at myself in mirrors for too long because all I could see was a body on trial. Then Daniel posted a photo from a rooftop bar with the caption, grateful for clarity. The official end of our relationship was almost insultingly practical. No screaming, no movie scene glass breaking, just signatures and logistics and the slow dismantling of a life I had thought was mutual. Daniel kept the apartment because his name was on more paperwork. I packed dishes into newspaper while he stood in the doorway, giving me the kind of careful politeness people use with unstable strangers. I'll cover the moving truck, he said. I looked at him over a box marked kitchen. How generous. His jaw tightened. You don't need to do this. Do what? Make everything uglier. I actually stared at him, because that was the moment I realized he believed ugliness had arrived with my reaction, not his lie. You told people I couldn't have children. I told people we had fertility issues. You told Vanessa I was the problem. He exhaled like I was exhausting him. I told Vanessa the truth as I understood it. As you understood it, I repeated. That's incredible. He rubbed the back of his neck and looked past me into the apartment, at the couch we picked together, the framed prints still hanging crooked because we never got around to leveling them. I didn't do this to hurt you, Claire. That sentence haunted me because it sounded so reasonable if you didn't know him. It almost worked on me in the moment. Almost. The first month after I moved into a one-bedroom rental, I lived like someone recovering from a flood. Everything felt damp and displaced. I cried in grocery store parking lots. I slept with the TV on because silence made the apartment feel temporary. My mother had already passed by then, and my father lived 2 states away with a new family who meant well from a distance. Support arrived mostly in texts. Thinking of you. Let me know if you need anything. The problem with that phrase was that I needed a version of my life that no one could return. Vanessa sent a longer message once. I don't know what's true anymore, but I'm sorry. I never answered. Then I saw a woman's coat hanging inside Daniel's car. I didn't stay to see who got out of the other car. I kept driving, hands shaking on the wheel, and by the time I reached the highway, I understood something ugly and useful. If I stayed in that city, I would keep orbiting the wreckage until it became my whole identity. So I left. Not dramatically. No social media announcement, no speech about fresh starts. I applied for a transfer with my company and moved 90 minutes away to a suburb where nobody knew the story Daniel had told about me. I found a small townhouse with beige carpets and a cracked mailbox and a bedroom that faced east, so morning light hit the wall before I was ready for it. I hated it at first. Then I started painting. Therapy came next, mostly because I got tired of hearing Daniel's voice in my own head. My therapist had a soft office lamp and a brutal talent for asking simple questions. The one that undid me was, why did his certainty become more believable than your experience? Because he sounded sure, I wanted to say. Because shame loves a confident witness. Instead, I cried into a tissue and admitted that somewhere along the way, I had started treating his judgment like medical fact. I still hadn't gone back for my own independent testing. Part of me didn't want confirmation. The other part didn't think I deserved clarity after I'd been discarded. Healing was not cinematic. It was tiny, repetitive, and often boring. I joined a walking group and barely spoke for 3 weeks. I cooked for myself instead of surviving on crackers. I blocked Daniel's accounts. I learned how to spend Friday nights without wondering who he was charming. The first time I laughed without guilt, it happened over burned pancakes at a neighbor's brunch, and I startled myself. Marcus entered my life in the least dramatic way possible. He held a door open at the hardware store while I wrestled a flat-pack shelf toward my car. He had paint on his thumb and a voice that never rushed me. When he asked if I wanted coffee, I almost said no from habit. On our 3rd date, I told him I might not be able to have children. He nodded once and said something that changed me. Then Marcus said the sentence that broke Daniel's voice in my head. Marcus never treated my past like contaminated material. He asked questions when I wanted to answer them and let silence stay silence when I didn't. He repaired things around my townhouse badly but enthusiastically, laughed with his whole chest, and never once made me feel like I was auditioning for permanence. Loving him felt less like being swept away and more like finally standing on level ground. We got married at City Hall with rain on the windows and exactly 8 people in attendance. No speeches about destiny. No polished vows. Just 2 people promising not to weaponize each other's weaknesses. That mattered to me more than romance ever had. A year later, I stood in my bathroom holding a pregnancy test so tightly the plastic bent. I had taken it alone before work because I didn't want anyone to watch hope happen to me again. When the second line appeared, I sat down on the closed toilet and waited for logic to catch up. It didn't. My chest hurt. My hands went numb. I took another test. Then another. When Marcus came home, I was still in the same spot. He saw my face and crouched immediately. What happened? I handed him the tests without speaking. He read them, looked at me, then read them again. Claire. I started crying so hard I couldn't breathe. I don't understand. He pulled me against him and said into my hair, "You don't have to understand tonight." At the first ultrasound, the technician smiled in a way that made me nervous. What? I asked. She turned the screen slightly. Well, there are 2. I laughed so suddenly it came out as a sob. Marcus actually said, "You're kidding," loud enough that the technician laughed too. 2 flickering heartbeats. 2 impossible little proofs moving inside the body I had once been taught to distrust. Pregnancy didn't erase what Daniel had done. It complicated it. Joy kept tripping over old grief. I would be folding onesies and suddenly remember the way he said infertile, like a verdict. I would feel a kick and then feel rage. It wasn't just that he had been wrong. It was that I had organized years of my life around his lie. Weeks later, I opened Vanessa's message. It contained only a photo and 6 words. You should know what he's celebrating. The photo showed Daniel in a navy suit at some rooftop tasting event, one hand on a woman's waist, the other lifting a champagne flute toward the camera. Behind him was a printed sign with cream lettering, Daniel and Elise, engagement weekend. He looked exactly the way men like him always looked in pictures. Expensive, relaxed, righteous. The kind of man people assumed told the truth because he moisturized. Under the photo, Vanessa had added another message. He's hosting the formal party next month at the Halston house. Big guest list. Family, clients, everyone. I almost didn't send this. I stared at my phone while Jonah napped on my chest and Lucy snored in the bassinet beside the couch. For a full minute, I felt nothing at all. Then old humiliation rose so fast it made me dizzy. Not because Daniel was engaged. That part barely mattered. What hit me was the idea of him standing in front of a room full of people, toasted and admired, after building his second chance on a lie that had poisoned my first. Marcus found me rereading the messages after dinner. "You've gone very quiet," he said. I handed him the phone. He read the texts, then looked at me carefully. "Do you want to go?" "No," I said immediately, because decent people said no to things like that. Then I said, "Maybe." He sat across from me at the kitchen table. Toys covered half the surface. A sticky sippy cup ring marked the wood. My actual life surrounded us, warm and messy and real. "What do you want from it?" That question annoyed me because it was reasonable. "I don't know." "Yes, you do." I hated that he was right. I wanted my name back. I wanted one room full of people to feel the crack between the story Daniel told and the truth he buried. I wanted at least one witness to see the expression on his face when the lie stopped protecting him. But I also didn't want to turn my children into props in an old war. For a week, I argued with myself in circles. Going felt petty. Not going felt like consent. I told myself closure didn't happen in banquet halls. Then I found an old folder while unpacking storage boxes from the move. Inside it was the clinic paperwork Daniel had insisted on taking to organize. One page was missing from my copy, and I knew exactly why. I spread every paper across the dining table after the twins fell asleep. Marcus brought tea I forgot to drink. There were billing summaries, lab slips, referral notes, and a discharge packet from the fertility clinic. Most of it was ordinary medical clutter, the kind you stuff into envelopes because throwing it away feels irresponsible. But now, looking at it years later with less panic and more memory, I saw the shape of an omission. The packet listed my hormone panel. It listed my imaging follow-up. It referenced male factor analysis under completed diagnostics, but there were no attached results. Back then, I had trusted Daniel when he said he'd pick up the records because I was at work. Back then, I still believed information belonged to both of us. The next morning, I called the clinic. I expected bureaucracy. Instead, I got Dr. Patel's nurse, who said the doctor still practiced 2 days a week. When I explained my name, there was a pause and then a quiet. "Let me see if she can speak to you." Dr. Patel remembered me. Not instantly, but enough. Enough to say, "I always hoped you got a second opinion." My stomach dropped. Why would I need one? Silence, professional and careful. "I can discuss only your records without proper release forms." Were my records consistent with infertility? I asked, already knowing the answer in my bones. "What I can say," she replied, "is that your chart did not support a definitive conclusion about you causing the conception delays." I sat down hard in the hallway. Did Daniel know that? Another pause. At that time, both partners were counseled about next steps. There were concerns requiring follow-up on his side as well. His side. I thanked her, hung up, and stared at the wall until Marcus came home. When I told him, his expression went still in a way that usually meant he was furious. "So he knew," he said. "I don't know how much." "You know enough." That night, I almost decided not to go to the party because the truth suddenly felt too big and too intimate for public consumption. Then Vanessa said, "He told Elise an even uglier version." I appreciated that. Vanessa noticed everything. "I owe you an apology that probably won't matter," she said once we sat down. "It will matter less if it starts with but," I told her. To her credit, it didn't. She admitted she had believed Daniel because he sounded calm and I sounded hurt, and in our circle calm was often mistaken for truthful. She said he never gave specifics, only implications. Claire was devastated. Claire couldn't face reality. Claire wanted me to stay no matter what. By the time Daniel got engaged to Elise, the old lie had become part of his biography, a neat tragic chapter that made him look patient instead of cruel. "What changed?" I asked. Vanessa swallowed. "He told the story at a dinner last week. Elise asked whether he'd ever had testing done. He laughed and said, 'Trust me, That wasn't where the issue was. It sounded rehearsed. Too rehearsed. Then his mother said something about Dr. Patel having spared his pride years ago. Every muscle in my back tightened. His mother knew? I don't know how much, but I think more than I did. Vanessa also had screenshots, texts Daniel had sent her during our breakup, fishing for sympathy. In one, he wrote, "I can't let this become my burden forever." In another, "Some truths are kinder when simplified." That line made Marcus mutter, "Simplified my ass." Between my documents, Vanessa's screenshots, and Dr. Patel's careful confirmation, the picture sharpened. Daniel had likely received abnormal results, hidden them, and recast uncertainty as my failure. Maybe to protect his ego. Maybe because leaving looked cleaner if I was the broken one. I still hesitated. What if this becomes a circus? I asked. Marcus leaned on the counter. Then we leave. But if he lies again in public and you stay silent because you're scared of making a scene, he wins twice. I looked toward the baby monitor, where soft static sat over my children's breathing, and realized I wasn't protecting peace. I was protecting the version of me he had trained to stay small. So I chose a dress, printed copies, and asked Vanessa one final question. Will you stand there when I tell the truth? The Halston house looked like a magazine spread designed by someone who had never spilled juice on anything. Creamstone entrance, polished brass lanterns, waiters in white jackets carrying tiny food on black trays. My hands were steady, which terrified me more than shaking would have. You can still decide this isn't worth it, Marcus said quietly. I checked the folder in my bag for the fourth time. Clinic notes. Screenshots. A signed release request. Just enough truth to survive denial. It's worth it, I said, though what I meant was, I can't unknow this anymore. Vanessa met us at the side entrance because she knew Daniel would have staff at the front. He's about to do the toast, she whispered. Your timing is awful. Good, I said. The ballroom doors opened on warmth, candlelight, and the low expensive hum of people congratulating themselves for being invited. Daniel stood near a flower wall with Elise at his side, one hand resting proprietorially at her back. He was midway through thanking everyone for celebrating new beginnings, when heads started turning toward us in ripples. Children change a room differently than adults do. First came curiosity, then confusion, then recognition. Lucy asked, too loudly, Mama, why everybody looking? Because your mother once disappeared so this man could stay comfortable, I thought. Instead I bent and said, because we're late. Daniel saw me then. The microphone lowered. The smile left. Elise looked from me to the children and then to Daniel with the dawning alarm of someone realizing she had entered a story much later than it began. I walked until there was no graceful way for anyone to pretend I wasn't there. Claire, Daniel said, this is inappropriate. I almost laughed at the familiarity of it. Every truth I had ever brought him was, in his view, badly timed. What's inappropriate, I said, is telling people I couldn't give you a family while hiding your own records. A glass clinked somewhere in the silence. Vanessa moved to my left. Marcus stayed by the door with the twins, visible but calm, ready if I broke. Daniel's face changed by a fraction, and that tiny change told me the lie had just recognized its ending. Daniel recovered faster than most people would have. That was one of his gifts. Shock hit him. Then calculation replaced it so quickly you could almost admire the reflex if you'd never been wounded by it. He set down the microphone and stepped toward me with both palms raised, performing reason for the crowd. Claire, he said, whatever this is, now isn't the time. I kept my voice level. You use time very efficiently, Daniel. For years of it. A few guests exchanged looks. Elise had gone rigid beside the floral display, one hand still around her champagne glass. Daniel, she said, not loudly. What is she talking about? He didn't answer her. He answered the room. My ex is upset and clearly trying to make a point with children present. The condescension in that sentence nearly transported me back into the old version of myself. Small, unsteady, easy to dismiss. Then Lucy tugged on Marcus's sleeve and whispered something that made him smile, and I remembered exactly who I was now. You told people I was infertile, I said. You let your friends, your family, and apparently your fiancé believe I was the reason our relationship ended. That was false. Daniel's jaw tightened. We had fertility problems. That's not false. Not what you told people. That's your interpretation. Vanessa stepped forward before I could answer. No, It isn't. Her voice trembled once, then steadied. You told me Claire was the issue. More than once. A murmur moved through the room. Daniel looked at her like betrayal offended him personally. He turned back to me and lowered his voice, hoping intimacy would do what facts no longer could. Do you really want to do this here? I pulled one sheet from the folder. Not dramatically, just enough. You already did it here, I said. You just did your version first. Elise put down her glass. Daniel, answer her. He reached for the paper in my hand. I stepped back. Don't, I said, and that one word came out strong enough to stop him. Then a man near the front asked the question Daniel had built his life to avoid. If she wasn't the reason, he said, then who was? You could feel the room leaning in. Daniel smiled, which was when I knew he still believed charm could outrun evidence. This is private medical history, he said, smooth again. I'm not going to entertain a public ambush built around old pain. That would sound noble, I said, if you hadn't spent years making my supposed infertility part of your public history. Elise looked like she might be sick. Vanessa crossed her arms. Marcus shifted Lucy to his hip and met my eyes once, just enough to steady me. I held up the clinic summary, careful not to show anything beyond what mattered. Dr. Patel documented that my chart did not support a conclusion that I caused our fertility issues. She also documented concerns requiring follow-up on Daniel's test results. Daniel's face lost color. Not all at once, just around the mouth first. That's a lie, he said. Vanessa took out her phone. Then why did you text me? Some truths are kinder when simplified. A few people nearest her heard it and repeated it. Simplified. The word moved through the room like a bad smell. I looked at Elise, because she deserved the truth even if I didn't know her comfort. He knew there were concerns on his side. I said, maybe not every answer yet, but enough to know he had no right to call me barren. Enough to know he lied. Daniel finally snapped. I was trying to protect my future, he said, too fast. Do you have any idea what that kind of diagnosis does to a man? To how people look at you? There it was. Not confusion. The motive. Pride dressed up as injury. So you let them look at me that way instead, I said. He opened his mouth, shut it, then said the cruelest honest thing he'd ever given me. You were already leaving behind the life I wanted. No, I said quietly. You decided I was easier to sacrifice. Elise stepped backward as if distance itself were suddenly urgent. You told me she was unstable, she whispered. You said she was obsessed. Daniel turned toward her. Elise, don't do this. But the room had already changed sides. Then Dr. Patel's name came from the doorway, and Daniel stopped breathing for half a second. I hadn't invited Dr. Patel. Vanessa had. Later she said she wasn't sure the doctor would come, only that she'd left a message explaining there might be a public lie built around her medical care. I would have thought no sane physician would touch that. But there she was in a slate gray suit near the entrance, expression composed, one hand still on the strap of her bag, as if she'd debated turning around in the parking lot. I'm not here to discuss confidential details, she said before Daniel could speak. Her voice carried anyway. I am here to say that no physician in my practice concluded Claire was solely responsible for that couple's fertility difficulties. The silence that followed had weight. Daniel tried anger next. This is unethical. Dr. Patel didn't flinch. What's unethical is misrepresenting medical conversations to harm another person. Elise took off her ring so quietly I only noticed because Daniel did. He stared at her hand the way some people stare at car wrecks, horrified, but still convinced damage can be reversed with enough insistence. Please, he said to her then, and it was the first genuinely frightened thing I'd heard from him all night. Not here. She set the ring on the linen-covered cocktail table between them. Apparently this is exactly where things happen. The rest unraveled without fireworks. Daniel's mother left first, chin lifted, as if dignity could be salvaged by exiting quickly. 2 business associates followed. Someone from the venue lowered the music. Guests began gathering purses and murmuring into phones. Vanessa cried, but not for him. Marcus brought the twins to me, and Lucy wrapped both arms around my neck, sticky and solid and gloriously alive. Daniel looked at me once more, not pleading now, just hollowed out by exposure. For years I had imagined that moment bringing triumph. Instead it brought relief, so deep it felt almost like grief. I wasn't happy he was ruined. I was happy I was no longer carrying what belonged to him. Outside, the night air hit my face like cold water. Then my hands started shaking only after we reached the car. People always imagine justice as a loud thing. A slam, a confession, a room erupting at exactly the right line. But what stayed with me afterward was quieter than that. It was waking up the next morning in my own house, hearing Jonah thump a toy against his crib rail, smelling coffee from the kitchen, and realizing Daniel's version of me had finally lost its lease inside my body. There was fallout, of course. A few mutual acquaintances sent embarrassed apologies that read like they were written to preserve their own self-image. Vanessa kept hers simple and did better than the rest. She kept showing up. Elise mailed me a note 6 weeks later. She wrote, "I wish I had known enough to ask better questions." I actually respected that. Questions matter. Silence does too. Sometimes it's mercy. Sometimes it's how lies get furniture. Marcus never asked whether confronting Daniel had been worth it. He only asked what I needed once it was over. The answer turned out to be ordinary life. Therapy again. Long walks. Fewer secret rehearsals in my head. More honesty when old shame tried to dress itself up as caution. I even went back for updated testing, not because I needed proof anymore, but because I deserved a relationship with my own body that wasn't built on fear. My doctor smiled at my chart, at my twins climbing over the waiting room chairs, and said, "I'm sorry you carried someone else's story for so long." So am I. If anyone reading this is living under a label someone cruel pinned to you, here's the thing I learned too late. People who need your silence will often call it grace. They will tell you that being the bigger person means staying blurred around the edges while they remain sharply innocent. It doesn't. Sometimes dignity is simply refusing to co-sign your own distortion. I did not crash Daniel's event to win him back, punish him, or prove my children were trophies. I went because truth deserved witnesses, and so did I.